G'day collectors, hope you had an awesome week finding some pieces out in the wild. This week I want to show you my lovely little dancing lady. Get her to focus, there she is. I'm hoping this is a Czechoslovakian piece and I'm hoping it's from the 1920s, but we'll talk about that in a minute. This video is more about reproductions and understanding that in the world there's molds out there that were made at a certain time but then continuing to produce products and things into the market today. And how do we recognize that as collectors and understand that that's part of our market? So let's get into it. As I said, this piece here, Czechoslovakian. The Czechs were prolific. There was a couple of guys back in the 1930s, Chevalt and Hoffman, and they produced some amazing pieces. Hoffman was influenced by René Lalique, and Chevalt produced things like the malachite and the jade molds and stuff. And these guys in Czechoslovakia at the time, in the early 1930s, were winning prizes in world fairs and producing huge amounts of molds. And perfume bottles was one of their big things and go-tos. Obviously the war came along. Unfortunately, Hoffman died in 39 and he would not see his life work finished. And Chevalt's whole story during the war is just crazy. It's worth looking up. It's a whole break off of story that goes on down there. But the upshot is that they produced these molds. Rydell, who was a glass producer in Czechoslovakia, were producing them for them. War comes along, molds disappear. Long time later, a glass company in Czechoslovakia comes along, finds a bulk of these molds and starts producing them. But they haven't got the time, the skill, or the labour to be able to really put out good high quality stuff. And they leave it to the importers, the retailers, the independents to tidy the pieces up. And the molds were probably a little bit damaged because they hadn't been used and all that sort of thing over time. So that period of time happens and they're being produced again. And I'll stick some photos up of some of the ones that were being produced. But the quality just wasn't there. Chevalt also produced a line called Ingrid, and this was based on his daughter, and they were just beautiful, beautiful pieces. Now, my hope is that this little dancing lady here, if she'll focus for me, might be an Ingrid, but very hard to tell. The Ingrids were very fine, very defined pieces when they first came out of the molds. Whether they continue making the molds, we just don't know. In the 90s, a whole heap of molds were found in Bohemia, about 50 of them that were Hoffman and Chevalt's. They went into production by a small Czechoslovakian producer. As I say again, the quality wasn't there, there was no markings there, so you can't tell when or who or how made it. Until the early 2000s, where Czechoslovakia basically nationalized all their glass companies and put it into one glass company. And from there, from 2000, 2002, hard to tell, it's either 2000 or 2002, they started producing etching on the bottom or on the pieces, on the bottles themselves that had Desna in the etching. Now, Desna was the town where they found 50 odd molds. So I guess, how do we know what these pieces are? So obviously there's been a story of reproduction, of originality, and then a story of reproduction. The original pieces, of course, it's going to be about quality. The bulk of it is going to be about quality. Being able to see these pieces and understand that, you know, the etching is of high detail. That, you know, they're old pieces. They're going to be 1930s, 1920s, 1930s pieces. They're not going to be marked. So you really have to look for the small details, the quality part. maybe a bit of wear because they're going to be old. That's a simple fact. Unless they went straight into a collection, they're going to be used and they're going to be old. I can see on this piece here, her dress has these lovely little lines. There's around her chest area, there's some detail of a crop top or something like that. The flowers, or the etching of the flowers, is really nice. But the bottle itself is pretty generic. You take the stopper out, and of course the stopper is glass too. And that's not going to focus. But you take the bottle, and the bottle's fairly generic. The only thing is that it's uranium, and that the quality of the etching is there. So, would this be a Chevalt and Hoffman piece? I just don't know. I'd like to think it is. Time period, it looks kind of like it. But for you guys out there collecting perfume bottles and Felicons, yeah, hard to tell. You just have to be an expert in your area. A good example too, and I've got to give a shout out to Kevin Harper here from Depression Glass Australian page on Facebook. He pointed out to me in my last video, which I'll drop in the descriptions down below if you want to follow the link and have a look in that, the centerpieces that I did. Now there is a whole story on them as well. So you had the original molds, and then somebody brought these molds again in the mid 80s. A fascinating story worth reading. I'll try and add the link into the description below so you can have a read. But all this sort of researching is just incredible for a newbie like me. And you've got to add this into your collecting thought. You know, it's got to be a part of your thought process now, because what you thought might have been just automatically thought it was 1930s could very well be a 1990s, a 2000 reproduction, and they're still producing this sort of stuff. Not this particular one, but ones that I'll stick up in the pictures here. They're still producing it today. So you just got to be very, very careful, very well informed. The centerpieces, as I say, were a classic example of molds that we used. Beautiful molds. And then in the 80s, they brought these molds, tweaked them a little bit, and then started producing again in different colors and different shapes. And obviously there were tweaks, so collectors would know what to look for. And Kevin sent me a marvelous article, and as I said, I'll try and add it down the bottom, but well worth the read and well worth the research if you are into collecting centerpieces. And I'm sure there's other things. I mean, most pressed glass is going to be molded. You can see the press down the middle here. It's going to be molded. So yeah, I think it's a case of a little bit of buyer beware, buyer be informed, and yeah, know your stuff a bit better, do the research. I've just had 2 weeks of fantastic research over Czechoslovakian glass, Bohemia glass, and what Kevin sent me in regards to the centerpieces. Yeah, it just blew my mind, because I mean, I'm only a new collector as far as collectors go, and there is a lot more knowledgeable people out there that know their stuff. So thank you very much for the information, guys. I hope this has helped somebody else. It's only very sort of short and brief. There is amazing histories out there on glass, and it's well worth researching, and it's a fun side that I'm starting to really get into. So let's hope she's 1930s. Ingrid's were produced from, I think it was about 1933, 34, and they go all the way up to to where the molds exist today. So thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope this was a little tiny snippet of information for you. Until next week, we will talk again. Find some cool pieces out in the wilds. Been looking at some amazing pieces on Facebook, on all the Facebook groups that I watch. So there's some amazing, incredible pieces out there. Until next time.